Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hey/X/, I'm a UFO experiencer and want to share my stories and create a discussion. I've posted my stories elsewhere, so I'll just copy-pasted my decade-long experience. I feel an obligation to share all of this with you. I don't know if there are others like me, but it seems that my surest shot of finding them, if they are out there, is to share my story openly. There's a stigma that exists surrounding this topic, so I've been hesitant to share what's been weighing on me to this point. My experience has affected me beyond measure, and my lack of ability to find answers has provoked me to catalog my encounters and experience so that others may benefit from having known about them. Everything that I am going to share has really happened, and due to how deeply this has all affected me, I'm going to request that only serious responses result from it. I will not claim anything is fact that isn't, and I understand how skeptical some of you may be. Since I am practically bearing my soul by writing this, I would appreciate that my openness be responded to with kindness and respectful discussion. Communities such as this would refer to me as a contactee, and my experiences have been happening for a decade. I will list all of what has happened chronologically over the past 10 years. I am learning as I go, and do not claim to have all the answers. Please respect my wishes, and be open to what I'm going to share. My first experience happened between March 10th to 15 of 2008. I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days after this, due to how badly it shook me. I was living with my mother on the southern edge of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, next to Moundville, Alabama. If you want to look it up on a map, this happened right next to Shelton State Community College in the Englewood neighborhood. There were a couple of friends whose house I left that lived near where my mother and I were living, and I remember I walked out at exactly 4 a.m. I was working at a movie theater and frequently closed, so I was always up at these kinds of hours. As soon as I walked out of their house, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and there was a red, green, blue, yellow, orange, white, strobing, flashing light. The colors and flashing were so rapid that I was frozen staring at it. The moon was very large and low in the south-southwest, and the craft was drifting southeast from the west and flew in front of the moon behind my friend's house. The outline of the craft was like a teardrop sunflower seed oval-type shape with the pointed end at the front. It looked as though lights were only coming from the top half of the craft, as if it were projecting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a darker, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared not too far behind it. My mother's place was a 10-minute walk or 2-minute drive, and it looked like it was about a half-mile away, flying towards my mother's place. I went inside and grabbed someone after it passed the moon, but it didn't look unusual to him at that point. I went home and looked out from my driveway in the direction from which the first one came. Creeping towards me over the horizon were 2 yellowish-white lights very low. I ran inside and grabbed my mom out of bed, and over the course of 20 minutes came 5 crafts. First came 2, then 2, and then 1, a few minutes apart from each other, a couple hundred feet off the ground, doing maybe 15 or 20 miles per hour, completely silent directly over us. They each had 2 large, circular, bright white lights, with a smaller red one between them in the back that dimmed and relit slowly. We were frozen watching them cruise directly over us. The last one that flew over us flew lower and slower than the first 4, and it made a noise. What I could best compare it to would be like the sound a hawk makes, mixed with a screaming bottle rocket, except digital, loud, and it made the sound twice. I immediately started crying because I didn't know what I was looking at or heard, but my mother was with me and remembers this. I was up for 4 days after this happened because it shook me so badly. From that point on, I looked up in the skies more frequently. My next experience wasn't until a couple of weeks later. I used to smoke and was standing in the driveway around 2 a.m. with a cigarette and my iPod Nano. I got the urge to pause my music and turn on the backlight. Then I waved my hand over the light to create a slight strobe pattern to see if anything would show. I got a strange feeling and looked around to see no cars. And then I looked up. Directly above me, maybe twice the height of my single-story garden home, was the shape of a trapezoid with a thin, dark red flickering and glowing outline, and smooth, rounded corners. It pivoted around above me side to side, back and forth, making no sharp stops or sudden movements, but drifted more like water. I couldn't move, and after about 10 or 15 seconds of watching this craft slowly dance above me, I very slowly raised my right hand above me to wave at it. After I did, it slowly drifted towards the highway, going south-southeast, the same direction that the 6 crafts from the first night flew. It was low enough that as it drifted over the house, I could see the top of the craft, and it was rounded on top with a red and white light. But the red one had a blinking pattern. It just drifted towards Highway 69, south towards Moundville, Alabama. I was very afraid to talk about what I had seen with people, and mostly kept it to myself after being hurt a couple of times. Not long after seeing the trapezoid, I had a dream that I originally thought was a premonition of the world potentially ending in 2012. In the dream, I exit these large double doors, and there's complete chaos and panic in the streets. Everyone was running to my left, and I was downtown somewhere with older brick buildings, maybe 3 or 5 stories tall. The clouds were low, dark, overcast gray, moving fast to the left. People were running and screaming while looking behind them, and when I looked up, this monolith tore the sky in two. It looked as if someone had covered an entire football field in cement 30 feet high, and the clouds funneled and bellowed off the sides of the craft as it tore the sky in two. After it passed, I don't remember who I was talking to, but I remember looking down and saying, "Do you believe me now?" Then I woke up. My heart was racing, I was sweating, couldn't breathe, and was choking back tears. I hope what I saw in my dream I never get to see while I'm awake. The next thing I saw was a couple months later, and this is by far the weirdest thing I've seen thus far. I was in the driveway smoking a cigarette, and I heard this sound, almost like TV static. I look around and almost directly over Shelton State Community College next to the neighborhood, I see this light blue vertical slit in the sky, probably 100 yards tall, with what looks like white fanning flames coming off the sides of it. It flickered like electricity, and then these smaller white crafts that resembled the first teardrop-shaped one that I saw shot out from the slit to the left, each making a noise as it came out. There were maybe 15 that came out of it at varying heights, and then the bottom of the slit practically zipped up, and it was gone. I still have no clue what I saw that night. The next thing I saw was around August of 2008, and I was in Hoover, Alabama at the top of this apartment complex that climbed a hill. It overlooked a bluff that went all the way back down the hill with a pool at the top. And while hanging out with some people, I saw what looked like a snow speeder from the Battle of Hoth in Star Wars, hanging almost eye level over the bluff facing me. As soon as I saw it and squinted, it zipped off to the right out of sight without making a sound. It may have been the same shape craft as the trapezoid, which also could have been the rainbow light craft that I saw from the side the first night in March of 2008. I'll jump around a little and say that I've seen the trapezoid shape appear twice in the sky, solid LED white, where the front of the trapezoid stretched to about twice the length of the craft, and then the back of it shooting towards where the front ended. I saw this once in 2008, and then again in 2011. Besides the occasional streak, things were pretty quiet until the end of April 2009. I used to talk about the things I'd seen and my thoughts surrounding it with a select group of friends, and there was a guy named Adam that I had just met that needed a ride home down Highway 43 North in Northport, Alabama, next to Tuscaloosa. We stood in his driveway before he went inside, and having had discussions about my experiences, I asked him what his thoughts were about what we'd been discussing. He said, "I don't know, man, it's pretty out there." All of a sudden, there was an intensely bright light that appeared over a hill. We were both immediately drawn to it, and we were making sure it wasn't a helicopter or a tower, and it wasn't. I started looking around, and directly above us were 2 orbs pivoting around fairly high up. I nudged him, and he looked up and freaked out a little. Then I told him that this is what I'd been telling him about, and encouraged him to wave at them with me. Once we did, the sky came to life. There must have been a few dozen yellowish orbs flying around in all different directions, with streaks shooting off in the distance. We were both smiling and in awe. It was, up to that point, the most activity I had seen in one night. I saw him a couple of days later and asked him about how he felt about what we saw, and all he would say is he didn't know what he saw. That was upsetting to say the least. A few months later, after having some spiritual discussion with another friend on their back porch in Bessemer, Alabama, I saw orbs again. This time, it was just a singular one that would drift and brighten up to an intense orange, very low, moving slowly, and completely silent only a few hundred yards away. After drifting to the side for a few seconds and being so bright you couldn't look directly at it, it would just fade out. We saw this happen a few times over the course of a couple of days. I haven't seen anything like this since. I moved to West Texas to go to school in the summer of 2011. There were a couple select people who genuinely wanted to learn about what I'd experienced, and I decided to take them out stargazing. We could head out east of town where there was little light pollution and always see something. There was one friend that I took out and we saw a streak that swooped. It was between the highway and us, made a boomerang-like shape with the light in its tail, got to within maybe 100 feet of the ground, and had a bluish green-lit tail. We'd also seen what I refer to as blinks, which is when a small white light would blip briefly. We'd point it out with the green beam laser pointer, and it'd move locations in that general area. I had a dream in 2012 that I didn't think until recently would be connected to my experiences in any way. I was at an outdoor festival around dusk, and this little energetic blonde girl started dancing with me, dancing so fast her hair hid her face and she wouldn't take no for an answer. I start dancing back and then I get curious. I tried to look at her face and then noticed that she had antlers. I stopped dancing and she noticed me noticing her and she stopped. She looked up at me with big blue eyes and started to cry and ran away. I did some research and found out the deer woman is a prominent figure in the folklore of many American Indian tribes. If you find out what she is, she'll flee. She is a figure that'd try and seduce young men at parties and take them behind the bushes and then stomp them with her hooves. She is a cautionary tale that promotes sexual responsibility, but also represents the importance of relationships, not just sexual. I am part Cherokee, and at the time was looking into getting my tribe card in order to help with educational expenses, and I feel that she cried since I was only looking to benefit from my heritage in a financial way. I found this article that talks about her, which also includes some interesting information. Link in the description. I was showing that article to a girl that I had been talking to at the beginning of 2018, and I caught something I didn't notice before. It says, "There is a common southeastern story that teaches us of our origins, that we were born of ancestors who came from the stars and mated with the people born from the earth, from the mounds that still exist in the southeast today." I had long considered that the ancient astronaut theory might be true, yet I didn't know that most American Indian tribes believed that their creators came from the stars. It took me 10 years to make the connection that the crafts from my first two experiences flew towards the Moundville Mounds in Moundville, Alabama, after they flew over me. In March of 2018, I was laying in bed with the girl that I had been talking to. It was around 2:55 a.m., and I got this jolt where a thought rose from the back of my mind forward. I checked the date, and it was within the window of when my first experiences started. It was the morning of March 13th, and I told her how weird it was that I got the thought of it being within the window exactly 10 years from when my experiences started. American Dad was on TV, and immediately after I said that, a character said 10 years on the dot. We looked at each other. I asked her if she wanted to go, and she said yes. We went past Crosbyton, Texas, and were standing out of the car looking at the stars and taking it all in for about 10 minutes. Then we saw a streak swoop on the other side of the highway from us. It had a blue tail and was headed straight for the ground before it changed course and corrected going away from us. This was the only time I'd seen a streak hold its tail, and then it waggled side to side, making ripples in the tail. The craft looked like it may have been trapezoid shaped, but it was definitely flat underneath. Unfortunately, we didn't work out, and I shortly after found a new girl that I'll just refer to as Kay. She and I became close fast, and she said that she wanted to see what I had been talking to her about. The morning of Mother's Day, around 1:30 a.m., we headed east on Texas Highway 82 until we reached the turn for McAdoo, Texas, and pulled off into a field. We saw a few streaks, and I signaled that we saw them. After that, I had my most profound experience to date. There was a star in the sky that looked peculiarly bright, and we had an arm around each other, leaning against the car, focusing on it. It turned from a yellow to an intense LED white and started to brighten. It got so bright that the aura surrounding it took up a considerable portion of the sky surrounding it. Imagine holding a basketball out in front of your face, and the area it took up was this baby powder blue. The closest resemblance that I could compare it to would be the Bethlehem star. Then it dimmed down, and other things started to happen. Off on the horizon southeast from us, I could see what looked like stars hidden within clouds, like illuminated fuzzy marshmallows. Looking closely, it looked like there were 3 smaller lights breaking off from the big ones that almost blossomed as they splintered off. The big fuzzy lights came closer and arranged themselves around us in a circle, all very low and equidistant apart from each other. Then I looked up, and it appeared as though the smaller lights had arranged themselves in a web or grid-like formation above us. It looked like a dome or cathedral of stars. It was windy and clouds encircled us, but the sky above us remained completely clear. I looked up, and straight at the top was a bright light in the very center. I told Kay to look up, and when we did, it was like a wave of light that was either refracted or given off once it passed each light in the grid. Each light gave off this purplish blue flash as it passed, kind of resembling the fluorescence of a peacock feather. It flowed down and cascaded around us, moving clockwise. I had to ask her if it was really happening, and she said it was. Once the wave reached the bottom where the fuzzy lights were within the clouds, the lights in the grid kind of rose up and faded out. I started looking around, and in the field we were in about 300 yards away, there was a light on the ground. It looked like a skinny pine cone about 10 to 12 feet tall, pointed tip up, glowing LED white. We asked each other if it was there before, and we both confirmed it hadn't been. We focused on it for maybe a minute, and then it started to slowly rise off the ground to probably 20 or 30 feet, and then it shot towards us extremely fast. Kay started crying and went to get in the car, saying she wanted to go home, so I felt I had to protect her. We got into the car and rushed back to the paved road, and Kay had her face in her hands, crying the whole time. We were pulling back towards the highway, and I looked to my left to see if the light was any closer. And there was a light barreling down one of the crop rows towards us, about 10 feet off the ground. From the front, it looked square, and it looked like there was one thin pink and one thin green line at the front that crossed. All I could think to do was to try to make Kay feel okay, and once we got to the stop sign on the highway, she settled down. I don't think we lost any time, but there was this calming, almost waking from a dream-like feeling that overcame me. She said that as long as she was in the car and we were on the main road, she was okay. We continued east and were looking up at the skies, and all of a sudden there was a pregnant doe in the road. Now, I don't want to read too deep into what I'm about to tell you next. It's just that she was alone and didn't even notice us as we swerved to narrowly miss her. It felt like the dream I had about the deer woman was intertwined with this somehow. Anyway, we both got tired and decided to head back. All of what we saw the morning of Mother's Day happened in about a 2-hour span. That morning I couldn't sleep, and Kay needed to. I liked walking my roommate's dog, a boxer, and decided after sunrise I'd take him for a walk. There was a coffee shop a few blocks away from where I lived that opened at 8 a.m., so we left at about 6:45 a.m. There were a bunch of books that were gifted to me, none of which I read, by a guy named Paul. He and his wife used to be regulars at a restaurant I used to work at in Birmingham, Alabama. When he found out I was going across states to get back in school, he decided to give me a bunch of books from his personal library. There was one book in particular that I spotted on the shelf. It was an older printing of Black Elk Speaks, and it almost spoke to me from off the shelf. Having had recent connections painted to American Indian tribes, I decided to take it with me to start reading while we waited for the coffee shop to open. I tucked it under my arm, and we began walking. It was the golden hour, and it was really quiet out with no cars that passed us. I had trained my roomie's dog to walk off the leash, and we made our way to the main road the coffee shop was on. As soon as we turned the corner, there were a bunch of doves in the road, and one kind of cocked its head at us and looked at us peculiarly as we passed. Then, a squirrel appeared on the top of the fence to my left, and ran behind my shoulder, which put the dog in pounce mode. I quickly blocked his path to shut him down from chasing it, and after consoling him to let him know he didn't do anything wrong, we kept on. We crossed the street to the side that the coffee shop was on, and that's when something extremely strange happened. We heard a bunch of doves screaming, like sounding the alarm screaming. We both look across the street, and they're in 2 trees in front of this house. From behind the house where the trees were slinked this gray fox with a dead black kitten in its mouth. I might be reading too deep into this, but I had just finished a year of my 3rd mental health degree, which was a PhD. I have been investing in my education to get qualified to open sober living and halfway housing for addicts and people exiting incarceration. It was as if the black kitten represented the most predominantly incarcerated class in the U.S., and the fox represented predatory practice of them. Nature may have presented a metaphorical example of my career aspirations and why I have them. This fox happily walked across the front yard of this house with its kill, crossed the street to the side we were on not more than 25 feet from us, and seemed super prideful about what it had done. With a dog twice its size off the leash, and it not being the least bit disturbed by us being there, it was a very eerie thing to witness. The dog and I walked on and hung a right towards a park a couple of blocks away, and I sat in a gazebo and cracked open Black Elk Speaks. I began reading, and was shocked to find the kinds of things that I had experienced and my thoughts regarding them on pretty much every page. I was shaken. Between the pregnant doe, the fox, and the kitten, and what is contained in Black Elk Speaks, it doesn't feel like I found these experiences by accident. It also feels like the spiritual component to what it is that I've experienced is much more closely intertwined with nature than I previously thought. Through research, I found that the Wakinyan, or thunder beings of traditional American Indian mythology, may be the most established cultural representation of what I've been experiencing. I felt I needed to share what I found and how it mirrored my own experience. So I reached out and found a somewhat prominent member of the Cherokee tribe that was willing to host a meeting for me. Kay and I went to Oklahoma a couple of days later, and we got our meeting. I shared what was on my heart, and the meeting ended with my contact saying that what I had brought aligned with their cultural beliefs about their creation story. He recommended we go spend some time down by a creek that ran through the center of town to take in nature, and we did. The whole time we were there was a lenticular tubular cloud that hung over the creek. Not feeling like I was fully considering what I came to say, I messaged my contact and told him that the cloud over the creek would prove my claim. Kay and I had a 5-gallon water jug that we decided to use to offer free water at a gas station on the edge of the park. After an hour, I got the urge to look up. When I did, 2 crafts entered from the right, low and slow. They looked like lightly flatter white eggs, but held a striking resemblance to the teardrop-shaped craft I first saw in March of 2008. Kay, others at the gas station, and I watched as both crafts flew into the cloud over the park, and only one flew out. I took that as our sign to go, and that was the last thing I've seen. What weighs on me most is why I have had as many encounters as I have, and what purpose it may hold. If there are other contactees or experiencers that would like to discuss what they've seen and what it could mean, I offer an ear to you. Please respect how deeply what I've seen has affected me, and I will be happy to engage in any fruitful discussion about my experiences. It feels good to get all of this out, and I thank you for taking the time to read it. Much love.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.